An historic bill at the state capitol this evening.
Utah is attempting to do something novel and do something great. We are attempting to balance LGBT rights in employment and housing with religious liberties.
The bill is a product of negotiations between some key lawmakers up here on the Hill, gay rights advocates, and the Mormon Church.
People outside of Utah would never imagine that our state would lead on LGBTQ rights, but we have.
In order to protect LGBTQ people, we don't have to deny religious liberties. And in order to provide protections for religious liberties, we don't have to deny LGBTQ people. The idea that we do is a fallacy that Utah has dismantled.
Standing side by side, members of the LGBT community and LDS community cheered together.
What does it mean when Equality Utah and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the leadership of the Democratic and Republican parties all stand together in a room and cheer for the same thing? This is a cultural milestone.
The miracle of what we've seen in Utah is that religious freedoms and the rights of the LGBTQ community can both be protected.
I felt really grateful and proud of what occurred here in Utah. It's a great example of what can be done in this country if we'll just make an effort and come together and try to find some common ground.
On our broadcast tonight, same-sex marriage is headed to the Supreme Court. It's a showdown over one of the biggest cultural issues of our time.
For more than 2 decades, all across the country, our community has been gripped in this struggle over marriage equality. This fight often divided LGBTQ people and religious denominations, and that was certainly the case in Utah. Utah is very unique. The geography is amongst some of the most beautiful in the nation, but it is highly hyper-conservative. The Utah legislature in any given year is approximately 80% Republican, and 90% of the legislators belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When you are working with LGBT rights in a state like Utah, and you want to advance legal equality, you can't do it without working with Republicans, with conservatives, with people of faith.
You have to embrace the fact that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are going to be part of your work. We, for a long time, had a very antagonistic relationship, and that didn't serve either of us well.
On one side, you had the LDS Church, the Catholic Church, and other denominations pitted against those of us pushing for the freedom to marry. And the tension was ripping our families apart because so many of us in the community grew up in Latter-day Saint homes. I had grown up in the LDS Church. I belonged to a giant Mormon family. And so many of the people that are my friends in our community have estranged relationships with their parents or siblings, aunts and uncles. So this wasn't just about politics. These divisions were breaking up our families.
For a long time, I think there were a lot of concerns between groups of faith and the LGBTQ community. You know, they didn't really have a close relationship with us. We didn't have a close relationship with them. We really got into what I would call a spin cycle of battling points of view to determine whose views are going to win.
I think 2008 was the year that the relationship changed between Equality Utah and the church. That was the year when leaders of the LGBT community started meeting with leaders of the church behind closed doors, having really candid conversations, hard stories to tell and hard stories to hear.
But we started asking ourselves a really critical question. Where do we have common ground? We know we don't agree on marriage equality, but what do we agree on?
The church was making a concerted effort to explain that they were not uniformly opposed to LGBT rights. In fact, that they supported employment and housing anti-discrimination laws.
So the dialogue with the church continued to grow. And by 2015, we were both ready to come to the table and hammer out a deal. The bill would provide legal protections in housing and employment for LGBTQ Utahns. The heart and the core of the negotiations was, can we balance LGBTQ rights and religious freedom?
When I first heard that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Equality Utah wanted to work together on a piece of legislation, I'm not quite sure if I really believed it.
I told both sides, if you bring a bill to me that only talks about one side of the issue, equality, equal rights alone, or if you bring religious freedom alone, I'll veto both bills. I will only accept a bill that has both of them combined. That way I know both sides will feel like they've been treated fairly.
The more of us that came out to our families, to our congregations, to our friends and relatives, or our workplaces, the more people started to challenge their own personal beliefs about what it means to be gay.
Once we began to really build deep and long-term relationships and began to actually see the humanity of each other, that really began to give us the platform to begin to build towards the passage of the legislation.
The beauty of this session is that we're all having difficult conversations together. This is new. This session has truly been a game changer, and we see this as a positive trend for the future.
We've had stakeholders on both sides put aside some of their deep-seated feelings to try to find balance.
This was truly a bipartisan effort, and not only were we starting to bring Republicans on board, we had our loyal Democrats at our side.
When it comes to religious liberty and when it comes to non-discrimination for LGBT people, we are there together.
These were difficult conversations. These were difficult dialogues. We'd have big debates over sentences and paragraphs and commas where I thought this could be derailed at any moment.
We were keenly aware that there were lines that we could not cross, and we had to know those very clearly, with great specificity, and we just simply had to regard the protection of those lines as a solemn responsibility.
Governor Gary Herbert could not wait to show off Utah's new anti-discrimination law to the hundreds of supporters that stood behind him and the law at the Capitol on Thursday.
I do believe that what we've done here will become a model for the rest of the country of how they too can resolve these issues in their own respective states.
One question, how cool is this?
Elder Tom Perry, LDS Quorum of the 12, was also on hand and was given a big debt of gratitude by the legislators for his support.
Listen, we believe in fairness for all. We're anxious to move forward. I think this is a great step.
Aside from the LDS Church, other denominations were supporting this effort. The Catholic Bishop of Salt Lake City at the time was John Wester, was no supporter of marriage equality, but he got behind the effort to protect LGBTQ people and religious liberty.
I think other denominations can learn that sometimes you have to take initiative and you have to sit down with people who you don't agree with. You can't be afraid. You have to have those conversations with them to find a way to promote human flourishing, and that's exactly what the LDS Church did.
Such a solid moment of joy, right? I remember seeing the speakers themselves getting emotional and realizing what a gift the LGBT community had given them to see themselves in this fundamental moment in Utah's history and the incredible role that they played in actually saying to all Utahns, you know what, you're welcome here and you're a part of our community. So it was very emotional for me, and as it is to this day.
Some people call this the Utah Compromise, and I actually don't like that term because no one compromised anything. We simply gave additional rights to the LGBTQ community, and we gave additional rights to the religious community.
I don't think anybody compromised their principles in this process. What we did was we worked together, and we had hard conversations, and we listened a lot, and we figured out what mattered most.
We were always trying to balance religious liberties and LGBTQ rights. And we're talking about a right to believe as your conscience dictates. Now, that's a right I never want to take away from anybody. And at the same time, I think it's absolutely wrong for a person to be discriminated in housing, in employment. There's a lot more to this conversation. We haven't figured this out, but we've made progress.
This work is hard, but people can come together if they view compromise as a good thing. I want this to be where it's society for everyone, where we celebrate individual differences, we protect each other's rights, and so that, in fact, Utah is together in all things.
As I went through the process, it was actually kind of life-changing to me because I felt before as I was trying to protect my religious beliefs, and that going through this process, I actually felt like I was living my religion.
Two of our staunchest allies on the Republican side here in Utah have been known in the past of being far right. And both of them have been willing to talk with us. Both of them have taken education, and both of them have moved over time. And it shows the impact of engaging instead of just getting mad, throwing up your arms, and walking away.
After the first big breakthrough, we realized that we had built these meaningful relationships with all the key stakeholders in our state. We weren't done. We could begin talking about other issues that were important to our community. The first issue that we tackled was discrimination in public schools. It's known as the No Promo Homo Law. This is a law that prevented teachers from even talking about LGBT people in public schools. And we were able to work with the leadership of both parties to have the law repealed by an almost unanimous vote. And the momentum continued. In 2019, we were able to pass the first meaningful hate crime protections for LGBT people in our state.
The passage of the hate crimes law was a big step for the trans community to be able to be visible. Without it, we feel like we have to hide in the shadows. And with this, we feel more visible, we feel empowered to be out and about and to be our authentic selves.
I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and right after high school, I joined the United States Air Force, and that was in 1999. I served tours in Iraq, so I'm an Iraq War veteran.
I finished a 20-year career in 2019. When I started my transition in the Air Force, there was a tremendous outpour of love towards me. It was something I was not expecting. It's when you brace yourself for a hit and the hit never happens. And it was such a great experience. It makes me feel that people truly can change and that people truly can see something that is different to them and accept it.
Most recently, we passed a statewide ban on conversion therapy, which is the dangerous practice of trying to change the sexual orientation or gender identity of minors.
I remember being an 8-year-old kid, always feeling that I knew God loved me because he had to, but it was like, I don't think he likes me. Conversions therapy tells you you can change, and you believe that. So what happens when you don't change? Your self-esteem plummets. Your shame is just compounded because you're like, there's something so gross about me that no matter how much time I put in, I'm not changing. I went through conversion therapy starting at age 17 till I was 28. I said sorry every single day of my life. I said sorry to God because of the feelings I felt. It doesn't work. If this law would have passed when I was a kid and I would have known about it, I think it would have just planted a seed saying, maybe I'm okay. So hopefully for kids out there, it sends that message of, oh, there's people out there that don't see this as a sickness that can be cured.
Over the last 4 or 5 years, as the laws have changed, you see a huge shift in the culture as well. It's not just we have legal protections, but now the LGBTQ community is being treated differently by their neighbors, by their family. Being black and gay is, I got the 2-for-1 deal, you know what I mean? I was born with it. Navigating this space can be really tricky sometimes. So while I was at BYU, I got involved with the on-campus sketch comedy group, which eventually became a sketch comedy TV show with BYU TV, which happens to be tied to the LDS Church. And it's broadcast all around the country. All he asks is that we do one thing.
What's that?
It's pray.
Come on, man. Just get it over with.
It grew from a little show on BYU TV to having like millions of subscribers on YouTube, which was crazy. As I was steeped into Utah and LDS culture, I was very intimidated to come out because that's not something in this very conservative culture that is widely accepted. And I was concerned about losing all the audience we'd built, the support of my friends, and even like professional respect for my peers. But I couldn't not come out, you know, it's part of who I am. And so eventually I did come out, and it was nothing what I expected. It was very positive.
I am so proud of the state for the progress that we have made. These laws are not just words on paper. They have a real world impact in the lives of our community. We still have challenges. It's not a perfect state, and there is so much more for us to do, particularly around transgender issues. But we have a system now of advancing equality that whenever there are issues, those communities come to the table. Nothing about us without us. We call it the Utah way.
We have to look back at history to see how far we've come.
Right.
You know, people often feel unrepresented in politics. If we're truly listening to understand, then there can be a meeting of the minds. We're in a much better place, a much more inclusive place, and I think that's good for the state of Utah and good for us personally.
Yeah, it's a beacon to the nation, you know, of how people, different ideologies can get together and work through and solve problems.
Okay, go!
These changes that protect LGBTQ people mean a lot to me as a person who is now married to my wife and who has an almost 5-year-old son. And it means for us that our family is protected. When I think about my kid growing up here in Utah, I can't imagine what it would have been like 10 years ago. Having a kid and being a family of 2 moms. I think there was question for a long time about whether or not this place was welcoming to us, and would we want to keep our family and our skills and our money here in Utah? And the answer was ultimately yes, because we saw it moving in the right direction.
The Utah economy really has benefited from our actions to make Utah a more welcoming place and a place where LGBTQ people feel valued.
If you look over the horizon, there are a lot of cranes, there are a lot of buildings being built. I think the Utah Compromise has shown the world that we're a welcoming state. It's improved the economy. It's brought new ideas. It's broadened our thought process. Everything that I hold dear, it has helped improve.
We call our tech sector Silicon Slopes. Roughly about 40% of our state's economic growth in the last 10 years has come from the tech sector.
Utah is a great draw for entrepreneurs and companies. Fundamentally, tech people like to break things, make things better, make improvements. And Utah really fosters that through not only kind of the culture, but the community and also through our laws.
A lot of businesses were watching this progress very closely. Adobe and others, they were saying, well, we're not going to go to a place if we can't ensure that our employees will be treated fairly. The fact that the state protects LGBTQ people is a real selling point for businesses looking to relocate to Utah.
When I look back over what we've achieved, it's a win-win for everyone. The changes we've made have been extremely popular in our state. There was a recent poll that showed that 77% of our state supported non-discrimination laws for the LGBTQ community. We ranked second highest in the nation.
I hope what it sends is that we are a state that very much invests in people. And I think that's really what you're doing here, is investing in the well-being of your society.
What happened in Utah with the Utah Compromise was clearly a miracle. Very rarely will you get to see an opportunity where the faith-based community and the LGBTQ community and the business community could all come together and peacefully coexist. I think that should be the goal of all of us.
The Utah Compromise shows us that when we come together, when we work hard and don't give up on each other, that we can come to solutions that make our nation a better place.
I think there are people of goodwill on both sides of this debate between LGBT rights and religious liberty. And if they can just listen to each other with a special attention for finding the values that they share with each other, they can strike an appropriate balance between the values of LGBT civil rights and religious liberties.
There are naysayers. There are people who don't believe that religious liberty can coexist with LGBTQ rights. That's simply not true. We have proven that here in Utah time and time again. And if we can do it in Utah, we can do it throughout the entire country.